The blizzard hit harder than anyone in Georgetown, Colorado had seen in 20 years, turning the world into a furious white nightmare that swallowed the mountains whole and threatened to bury everything in its path. Ethan Turner stood at the window of his small ranch house, watching the snow whip sideways across his property, worrying about his cattle huddled somewhere out there in the storm. It was February of 1882, and winter had decided to remind everyone just how brutal it could be this high in the Rocky Mountains. He had moved to Colorado 3 years ago, leaving behind the dust and heat of Texas for something different, something that felt like a fresh start after losing his parents to fever. At 26 years old, he had built this ranch with his own 2 hands, carved out a modest living raising cattle and horses, and learned to appreciate the solitude that came with living several miles outside of town. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and finding every crack in the walls to whisper through. Ethan pulled his wool coat tighter and added another log to the fire, knowing he would be burning through his woodpile faster than usual tonight. The temperature had dropped so low that frost crept along the inside edges of the windows despite the roaring fire. He had brought his 2 horses into the barn earlier, making sure they had plenty of hay and water, but the cattle would have to weather the storm on their own, hopefully finding shelter in the ravines and among the pines. As he turned back toward the kitchen to heat some coffee, a sound cut through the wind. At first, he thought it was just another trick of the storm, but then he heard it again. A voice, faint and desperate, calling out from somewhere beyond his door. Ethan grabbed the lantern from the table and moved quickly to the entrance, throwing open the heavy wooden door against the force of the wind. Snow blasted into his face, temporarily blinding him, but he held the lantern high and peered into the white chaos. There, barely visible through the curtain of snow, a figure stumbled toward his porch. Small, hunched against the cold, moving with the last reserves of strength. Ethan did not hesitate. He set the lantern down and plunged into the storm, his boots immediately sinking into snow that came up past his knees. Within seconds, his face went numb from the cold, but he pushed forward until he reached the figure. It was a woman, he realized, her lips blue, her dark hair crusted with ice, her buckskin clothing soaked through and frozen stiff. Her eyes met his, dark and filled with both terror and hope, before they rolled back and she collapsed into his arms. Ethan lifted her without effort, despite the wind trying to tear them both away, and he fought his way back to the house, kicking the door shut behind them once they were inside. He carried her directly to the fire and laid her down on the woven rug, his heart pounding as he realized how cold she was. Her skin felt like touching stone left out in winter. He had seen frostbite before, knew what happened to people caught in storms like this. Minutes could mean the difference between life and death. Working quickly, Ethan removed her frozen moccasins and the wet outer layers of her clothing, trying to maintain her modesty while knowing that leaving her in frozen buckskin would kill her. He wrapped her in every blanket he owned, then added his own quilts from the bedroom, building a cocoon of warmth around her. Her breathing was shallow, her face pale beneath the brown tone of her skin. He could see she was Apache from her clothing and features, and he wondered what terrible circumstances had led her to be out in this storm, miles from any settlement or reservation. He heated water and carefully began warming her hands and feet, knowing better than to warm someone too quickly. Her fingers were like ice sticks, and he massaged them gently, praying that the circulation would return. As he worked, he studied her face. She could not have been much younger than him, perhaps 22 or 23, with high cheekbones and a straight nose. Even half frozen and unconscious, there was a strength to her features, a dignity that made him want to help her even more. For hours, Ethan tended to her while the blizzard raged outside. He got warm broth down her throat when she was conscious enough to swallow, changed out the blankets when they grew damp from melted snow and ice, and kept the fire burning hot. Slowly, painfully slowly, color began returning to her face. Her breathing deepened and became more regular. The blue tinge left her lips. As dawn approached, though no one could tell with the storm still blocking out the sun, her eyes finally opened and focused on him. She tried to sit up immediately, panic flashing across her face, but Ethan held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Easy now. You are safe. I am not going to hurt you." She stared at him, clearly trying to decide if she could trust him, her body tense despite her obvious weakness. When she spoke, her English was clear but accented. "Where am I? My ranch, about 5 miles west of Georgetown. You collapsed outside my door during the storm. What were you doing out there?" Her eyes clouded with memory and she looked away. "Running. They were chasing me. I got separated from my sister. The storm came so fast." "Who was chasing you?" She hesitated, clearly unsure how much to tell him. "Men from town. They said we stole a horse, but we did not. We were only passing through, trying to reach our people further north." Ethan felt anger stir in his chest. He knew the kind of men she meant, the ones who saw Apache people as something less than human, who would use any excuse to cause trouble. The wars were supposed to be over, but the hatred lingered like poison in the ground. "Your sister, where was she when you last saw her?" "Near the river, maybe 2 miles from town. We tried to hide in the trees, but they had dogs. The storm started and I ran. I do not know if she got away." Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "I need to find her. Not in this storm. Nobody is going anywhere right now. That blizzard will kill anyone who goes out in it. When it breaks, I will help you look for her, I promise." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for deception. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." "Because it is the right thing to do. And because nobody deserves to freeze to death, especially not for something they did not do." He stood and moved to the kitchen. "You need to eat something hot, build your strength back up. What is your name?" Another hesitation then. "Enola. Enola Whitehorse." "Ethan Turner." "Good to meet you, Enola, though I wish it was under better circumstances." He ladled stew into a bowl, remnants from his dinner the night before, and brought it to her. She accepted it with both hands, still wrapped in blankets, and ate slowly. He could see how hungry she was by the way she had to force herself not to gulp it down. The storm continued for 2 more days. During that time, Ethan learned more about Enola and her circumstances. She and her younger sister, Kaya, had been living on a reservation in Arizona, but conditions there had become unbearable. Starvation, disease, and cruelty from corrupt Indian agents had driven them to leave, hoping to reach relatives among the Apache bands further north, who had managed to maintain some independence in the Colorado mountains. They had been traveling for weeks, staying off main roads, avoiding towns, surviving on what they could hunt and gather. "We were careful," Enola said on the second evening, sitting by the fire with a blanket around her shoulders. Her strength had returned considerably, and though her feet had some minor frostbite, Ethan thought she would heal without losing any toes. "But in Georgetown, we had to go through to reach the mountain passes. Some men saw us at the edge of town and started following us. They were drunk, saying terrible things. Then one of them claimed we took his horse, which was a lie. His horse was tied right there in front of the saloon, but it gave them an excuse." "Did you recognize any of them?" Ethan asked, stoking the fire. "One had a badge." "Not the sheriff, but a deputy, I think. Tall, with a scar on his face." Ethan knew who she meant. Jake Parsons, the deputy under Sheriff Morris. Parsons was known for being rough with anyone he considered beneath him, and he made no secret of his hatred for Indians. The sheriff was a decent man but getting old and tired, and he often let Parsons do as he pleased to avoid conflict. That would be Deputy Parsons. He is trouble. Will he come looking for me? Enola asked, worry creasing her brow. Not in this storm, and when it clears he will not find you here. I will make sure of that. You risk much for a stranger. Ethan met her eyes across the fire. Maybe, but I have seen enough injustice in my life to know I do not want to be part of it. My father always taught me that a man is measured by how he treats those who cannot defend themselves. I intend to live by that. Something shifted in Enola's expression, a softening around her eyes. Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was. So was my mother. I miss them every day. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind outside. The storm was finally beginning to lose some of its fury, the howling becoming more intermittent. By morning, Ethan thought it might be safe to venture out. Tell me about your ranch, Enola said eventually. How did you come to be here? Ethan told her about leaving Texas, about wanting to build something of his own, about the challenges of ranching in Colorado's high country. As he spoke, he found himself sharing more than he usually did, drawn out by her genuine interest and the intelligence in her questions. She told him about growing up in Arizona, about learning to track game with her father, about the stories her grandmother had told her of the old days before the white men came in such numbers. They talked until the fire burned low and sleep finally claimed them both, Ethan in his bed and Enola wrapped in blankets by the fire, though he had offered her the bedroom more than once. When dawn came, the storm had passed. The world outside was transformed into a landscape of white, with snowdrifts reaching halfway up the side of the house, and the trees bowed under the weight of accumulated snow. The sky was clear and painfully blue, and the silence after days of howling wind felt almost supernatural. Ethan fed the horses first thing, digging a path to the barn through snow that came up to his waist in places. The horses nickered gratefully when he brought them grain and fresh water. His cattle were somewhere out on the range, and he would need to ride out soon to check on them, but first he had a promise to keep. Enola stood on the porch, looking out at the transformed landscape with her hand shading her eyes. I need to look for Kaya. I know. Let me saddle the horses, and we will head toward where you last saw her. Can you ride? Since before I could walk. They set out an hour later, both bundled against the cold though the sun was bright overhead. The snow made the going slow, and they had to pick their way carefully, letting the horses choose their footing. Ethan brought his rifle, not because he expected trouble from people, but because the storm might have driven predators down from the higher elevations. Mountain lions and wolves got desperate in weather like this. Enola directed them back toward the river, following her memory of the land despite how different everything looked under the snow. As they rode, Ethan found himself watching her, noting how naturally she sat a horse, how her eyes constantly scanned the landscape reading signs that he could not see. She pointed out tracks left by deer, places where the snow had melted faster, indicating underground springs, the distant shape of an eagle circling against the blue sky. Her knowledge of the wild was deep and instinctive in a way that made his own wilderness skills seem clumsy in comparison. There, she said suddenly, pointing toward a cluster of rocks and pines near the river. That is where we separated. I ran east up toward your ranch, though I did not know that at the time. I just ran until I could not run anymore. They searched the area carefully, Enola calling her sister's name into the quiet morning. The only responses were echoes and the distant cawing of crows. They found signs of the chase that had happened days before, tracks mostly covered by new snow and places where dogs had torn up the ground. But of Kaya herself, there was no sign. She might have made it to the caves, Enola said, hope and worry mixed in her voice. There are caves in the cliffs about 3 miles from here. We had planned to shelter there if we got separated. She knows I would look there. It took them another 2 hours to reach the caves, following a narrow trail along the river that required the horses to step carefully around ice-covered rocks. The entrance to the cave system was partially hidden by an overhang, and the snow in front of it was disturbed, showing that something or someone had been there recently. Enola dismounted quickly and hurried forward, calling her sister's name. A moment later, a figure emerged from the darkness of the cave, thin and wrapped in a torn blanket but alive. The two women embraced fiercely, both talking at once in Apache, voices thick with tears and relief. Ethan stayed back, holding the horses, giving them their moment. When they finally separated, Enola turned to him with a smile that transformed her entire face, making her almost luminous with happiness. "Ethan, this is my sister, Kaya. Kaya, this is Ethan Turner. He saved my life." Kaya was younger, perhaps 19, with the same high cheekbones and dark eyes as her sister but a rounder face. She looked warily at Ethan but managed a nod. "Thank you for helping my sister. You both need to get somewhere warm," Ethan said. "Kaya, can you ride?" "Yes, but I do not have a horse." "You can ride with your sister. My mare is strong enough to carry you both for the distance back to my ranch." "Your ranch?" Kaya asked, looking at Enola questioningly. "It is safe there," Enola assured her. "Ethan has been kind to me. I trust him." The ride back took longer with 2 riders on 1 horse, and Ethan could see that Kaya was weak from exposure and hunger. She had managed to build a small fire in the cave using wood she had gathered before the storm hit, and that had likely saved her life, but she had not eaten in days. When they finally reached the ranch house, she was swaying in the saddle, barely conscious. They got her inside and warm, feeding her small amounts at first to avoid overwhelming her system. Ethan gave up his bedroom to the sisters, insisting that he was perfectly comfortable making a bedroll by the fire. That evening, as Kaya slept off her ordeal and Enola helped him prepare dinner, they talked more about what would happen next. "We cannot stay here forever," Enola said, cutting vegetables with practiced efficiency. "You have already done too much for us and we put you in danger just by being here. Where will you go?" "North, as we planned, to find our mother's brother and his band. They live in the mountains, moving with the seasons. It will be hard to find them, but we have no other choice. We cannot go back to the reservation." Ethan stirred the pot of beans hanging over the fire, thinking, "That is dangerous country, especially this time of year. And Parsons might still be looking for you. We have no other option. You could stay here, at least through the worst of winter. By spring, the passes will be clearer, and you will have a better chance of making it north." Enola stopped cutting and looked at him. "You would let 2 Apache women live in your house for months. What would people in town say?" "I do not much care what people in town say. I keep to myself mostly, come in for supplies maybe once a month. As long as you stay out of sight when I have business in Georgetown, nobody needs to know you are here." "Why would you do this?" Ethan met her gaze steadily. "Because it is right. Because you need help and I can provide it. And because, honestly, I would like the company. This ranch gets lonely in winter." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding, a connection that went deeper than words. Enola nodded slowly. "We will stay until spring, but we will work for our keep. I can hunt, trap, help with your animals. Kaya is good with leather and sewing. We will not be a burden. I never thought you would be." Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Ethan rode out most days to check on his cattle, finding that he had lost fewer than expected to the storm. Enola often accompanied him, and he was amazed at how much she knew about tracking and animal behavior. She showed him signs he had missed, helped him find cattle that had wandered far from the main herd, and taught him techniques for predicting where animals would seek shelter during storms. Kaya stayed closer to the house, still recovering her strength. She was quieter than her sister, more suspicious of Ethan, but gradually she warmed to him, especially when he brought home a deer he had shot and gave her the hide to work with. She transformed it into soft leather with a skill that left him shaking his head in admiration. As February turned into March, something began growing between Ethan and Enola that neither of them spoke about but both felt. It was in the way his heart lifted when he saw her in the morning, the way she smiled more easily when she was around him, the way they could work side by side in comfortable silence or talk for hours by the fire. He found himself noticing small things about her, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was concentrating, how her laugh was like music, the strength and grace in her movements. One evening, when Kaya had already gone to bed, Ethan and Enola sat by the fire, and he finally gave voice to what he had been thinking about for days. "I am glad the storm brought you here. I know that is a strange thing to say, given how you almost died, but I cannot help feeling that way." Enola looked at him, firelight dancing in her dark eyes. "I am glad too. I feel safe here in a way I have not felt in a long time. You are a good man, Ethan Turner. You are a remarkable woman, Enola Whitehorse." She ducked her head, but he could see the pleasure his words brought her. "My people would say we come from different worlds, that there is too much history, too much pain between our peoples. Your people would be right about the history and the pain, but they would be wrong about it being impossible to bridge that gap. At least, I hope they would be wrong." "What are you saying?" Ethan took a breath, knowing he was stepping off a cliff but unable to stop himself. "I am saying that somewhere along the way, I started caring about you as more than just someone I was helping. I am saying that the thought of you leaving in the spring makes my chest hurt. I am saying that I would like you to stay if you wanted to, not just through winter but longer, permanently." Enola was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "I have thought about staying, more than I should, perhaps. But it is complicated, Ethan. I am Apache. You are white. People in town would not accept it. They might even try to hurt you because of me. Let them try. I have faced down angry cattle and mountain lions. I am not afraid of small-minded men. You should be. Small-minded men with power are dangerous. So we will be careful. We will be smart about it, but I am not willing to let fear stop me from something that feels this right." He reached over and took her hand, his heart pounding. "Tell me you do not feel it too. Tell me I am imagining this connection between us." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. "I cannot tell you that, because I do feel it. From almost the first day when I saw how kind you were, how you helped me without asking for anything in return. I have been trying not to feel it, but I cannot help myself. Then stay. Both of you, we will figure out the rest as we go. Kaya wants to find our uncle. She has her heart set on it. Then I will help her get there when spring comes. But you, Enola, you could stay if you wanted to. The choice is yours, and I will respect whatever you decide, but I needed you to know how I feel." Enola squeezed his hand, tears glistening in her eyes. "I need to think about it. This is not a small decision. I know, take all the time you need." But even as he said it, he could see in her face that part of her had already decided. The question was whether she would let herself accept what she wanted. A few days later, Ethan made his monthly trip into Georgetown for supplies. He left early in the morning, with both women safely hidden in the house with instructions to keep the curtains drawn and stay quiet. The ride into town took most of the morning, the trails still muddy from snowmelt but passable. Georgetown was bustling with activity, miners and ranchers all venturing out after being cooped up during the worst of winter. Ethan conducted his business quickly at the general store, loading flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples into his saddlebags. He was about to head to the feed store when he heard a familiar voice behind him. "Turner, been a while since you came to town." He turned to see Deputy Parsons leaning against a post, his thumbs hooked in his belt. The scar on his face was pale against his ruddy skin. "Deputy, I have been busy with the ranch." "Sure you have. Say, you have not seen any Apache women around your way, have you? Had a couple slip through our fingers during that big storm last month. Thieves. Probably froze to death out there, but I like to be thorough." Ethan kept his face neutral. "Have not seen anyone. I am pretty isolated out there." Parsons studied him for a moment, his eyes calculating. "Yeah, I suppose you are. Well, if you do see anything, you let me know. There is a reward for information leading to their capture. I will keep that in mind." Ethan finished his business and headed home, his stomach tight with worry. Parsons was still actively looking for the sisters. That meant they would need to be even more careful. When he arrived back at the ranch, he told Enola and Kaya about the encounter. "We should leave soon," Kaya said immediately, "before he finds us and brings trouble on your house." "Where will you go?" Ethan asked. "The passes are still dangerous and you do not have proper supplies for a journey like that." "We will manage. We have before." "Kaya," Enola said gently, "perhaps we should wait a bit longer, just until conditions improve." Her sister looked at her sharply. "Or perhaps you have other reasons for wanting to stay." The two women argued in Apache, their voices rising. Ethan could not understand the words, but he could read the emotions clearly enough. Finally, Kaya threw up her hands and stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door. "I am sorry," Enola said, looking exhausted. "She is scared. We have been running for so long and she just wants to reach safety." "I understand, but running right now without proper preparation could get you both killed." "I know. I will talk to her, make her see reason." She paused, looking at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. "I have been thinking about what you said about staying. And I want to. More than I have wanted anything in a long time, but I cannot abandon my sister. She needs me. Then we will all go north in the spring. I will take you to find your uncle, make sure you both get there safely. You would leave your ranch for that long. For you, yes. The ranch will still be here when I get back. But Enola, after that, I hope you will come back with me." She moved closer to him, reaching up to touch his face. "You have given me something I thought I had lost forever. Hope. Whatever happens, I want you to know that." He caught her hand and pressed his lips to her palm. "Stay with me, not just for now but always. I love you, Enola. I know it is fast and I know the world will not make it easy, but I do not care. I love you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I love you too. I have been trying not to, but my heart does not listen to reason." He pulled her into his arms and she came willingly, her head tucking perfectly under his chin. They stood like that for a long time, holding each other while the fire crackled and the wind whispered around the eaves. When they finally separated, Enola smiled up at him, a smile full of hope and possibility. "We will make it work," she said. "Somehow, we will," he agreed. That night, after Kaya had reluctantly apologized for her outburst and agreed to wait until conditions were better before traveling, Ethan and Enola sat outside on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching the stars wheel overhead. The sky was impossibly clear, the stars so bright and numerous they looked like spilled salt. "My grandmother used to tell stories about the stars," Enola said, her shoulder warm against his. She said they were campfires of those who had gone before us, watching over their descendants, guiding us through the darkness. That is a beautiful thought. She would have liked you, I think. She always said to judge a person by their actions, not their words or their appearance. You have shown through your actions who you are. I hope I can keep living up to that. They sat in comfortable silence, and Ethan felt a peace settle over him that he had not known he was missing. This was what he had been looking for when he left Texas, though he had not known it at the time. Not just land or cattle or independence, but connection. Love. A sense of purpose beyond just surviving. As winter gradually released its grip and signs of spring began appearing, Ethan and Enola grew even closer. They worked together during the days, checking on the cattle as they gave birth to calves, repairing winter damage to fences and outbuildings, planting a garden near the house. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes talking, sometimes just being together. He taught her to read better, as she had only basic literacy from a missionary school in her childhood. She taught him words in Apache and more about tracking and wilderness survival. Kaya watched all this with mixed feelings. She was grateful to Ethan for saving them and caring for them, but she was also afraid of what would happen if her sister chose to stay with him. She had already lost so much. The idea of losing Enola too, even to something good, was painful. Ethan tried to include her in activities, to show her that she would always be welcome at the ranch, but he could sense her pulling away, preparing herself for separation. One evening in early April, as the snow had mostly melted except in the deepest shadows and the first wildflowers were beginning to appear on the south-facing slopes, Kaya came to Ethan while he was working in the barn. "I need to speak with you," she said, her expression serious. "Of course." "What is on your mind?" "I want to leave within the week. The passes are clear enough now, and I can make good time if I go alone. I do not need you to guide me. I know the way." Ethan set down the harness he had been repairing. "Does Enola know about this?" "Not yet. I wanted to talk to you first." "I know she wants to stay here with you. I can see it in her eyes, in the way she looks at you, and I think you are good for her, but I cannot stay. I need to find our people, to be among those who understand what we have been through." "I respect that, but I do not think you should go alone. The country between here and there is rough, and there are dangers beyond weather and wild animals, men who would not hesitate to hurt a lone Apache woman. I will be careful. Let me keep my promise. Let me guide you north. Enola and I will both go with you, see you safely to your uncle, and then Enola can make her final decision about where she wants to be. If she chooses to stay with your people, I will accept that. But at least this way, you will both be safe." Kaya considered this, then nodded slowly. "You are a better man than I first thought, Ethan Turner. Yes, we will do it your way." When they told Enola that evening, she was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire. Finally, she spoke. "I will go north with Kaya, help her find our uncle, but then I want to come back here. This is my home now." Kaya looked pained but not surprised. "Are you certain life will not be easy for you living as a white man's wife?" "I am certain, and as for difficulties, we will face them together." Ethan reached over and took Enola's hand. "Together," he echoed. They spent the next week preparing for the journey. Ethan arranged for a neighbor, an older rancher named Bill Clayton, who owed him a favor, to check on his cattle and horses while he was gone. He packed supplies carefully, making sure they had enough food, ammunition, and trade goods. Enola and Kaya prepared travel rations and made sure their clothing was in good repair. There was an air of anticipation mixed with sadness as they made ready to leave the place that had become a sanctuary. The morning they departed, Ethan looked back at his ranch house sitting quiet and sturdy in the early light, and felt a pang of worry. Anything could happen while he was gone, but he pushed the fear aside. Some things were more important than property. Making sure the woman he loved and her sister were safe was one of those things. They traveled north and west, following game trails and avoiding settlements. The journey took them through some of the most beautiful country Ethan had ever seen. High mountain meadows just beginning to green up, rushing streams swollen with snowmelt, forests of pine and aspen where elk moved like ghosts through the trees. Enola was in her element, reading the land like a book, finding the best routes and places to camp. Even Kaya seemed to relax a bit, smiling more as they got further from Georgetown and closer to Apache territory. It took them 12 days to reach the region where Enola and Kaya believed their uncle's band would be. They asked discreet questions at a trading post run by a mixed-blood man who was sympathetic to Apache people, and he gave them directions to a hidden valley where the band had been seen recently. They found the camp 2 days later, tucked into a fold of mountains near a spring. There were perhaps 40 people living there, a mix of families who had refused to go to the reservation or who had, like Enola and Kaya, fled its hardships. They were greeted with caution at first. Rifles pointed their way until Enola called out in Apache, identifying herself and asking for her uncle by name. An older man emerged from one of the wickiups, his face weathered and scarred but his eyes sharp. When he saw Enola and Kaya, his stern expression cracked into a smile and he hurried forward, embracing both women and speaking rapidly in Apache. Other people gathered around, welcoming the sisters home, asking questions, looking curiously at Ethan. Enola's uncle, whose name was Delche, spoke some English. He turned to Ethan and regarded him carefully. "You brought my nieces here. For that, you have my thanks. But why does a white man travel with Apache women?" "Because I love your niece Enola, and I wanted to make sure she and her sister reached safety." This caused a stir among the gathered people. Delche's eyebrows rose. "Love, that is a bold thing to claim. It is the truth." Delche spoke in Apache to Enola, a long conversation that Ethan could not follow. He stood there, feeling exposed under the stares of the people, but he met their eyes steadily, trying to show that he meant no harm. Finally, Enola nodded and turned to him. "My uncle invites you to stay as a guest while we visit. He says he wants to take your measure to see if you are worthy of such a claim. I accept his hospitality." They spent 3 days in the camp. Ethan helped with chores, hunted with some of the men, and showed respect for their ways even when he did not fully understand them. Delche watched him constantly, asking questions through Enola about his past, his intentions, his understanding of what life would be like for Enola if she chose to live in the white world. Ethan answered as honestly as he could, holding nothing back. On the 3rd evening, Delche invited Ethan to share a pipe with him and some of the other elders. They sat in a circle around a fire, and Delche spoke in English so Ethan could understand. "You are not like most white men I have known. You do not look at us with hatred or contempt. You do not assume you know better than us. Why is that?" Ethan considered his answer carefully. "My father taught me that every person, regardless of their color or culture, deserves respect until they prove otherwise through their actions. And I have seen enough of the world to know that my people have committed terrible wrongs against yours. I cannot change the past, but I can choose to act differently in the present." Pretty words. But words are easy. Actions are what matter. I agree. Judge me by what I do, not by what I say. Delche nodded slowly. "I have been watching you. You work hard. You do not complain. You show respect. And I see how my niece looks at you, how you look at her. That kind of love is rare. It would be a shame to destroy it because of the color of your skin." He paused, drawing on the pipe, then continued. "But I will tell you this, Ethan Turner. If you take Enola back to your world, her life will be hard. People will say cruel things. They may try to hurt her or you. The government might come with their laws and their papers, trying to force her onto a reservation. You must be strong enough to protect her from all of this. Can you do that?" "I will spend every day of my life trying to. I cannot promise we will not face hardship, because I know we will. But I can promise that I will love her and stand by her no matter what comes." Delche studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you have my blessing. Take care of my niece or I will come find you." Ethan smiled. "I would expect nothing less." The next morning they prepared to leave. Kaya had decided to stay with her uncle's band, and while she was sad to see Enola go, there was peace in the farewell. The sisters embraced for a long time, speaking softly to each other in Apache. When they finally separated, both had tears on their faces. "Be happy," Kaya said to Enola in English so Ethan could understand. "You deserve happiness." "So do you. Be safe, sister. I will visit when I can." "I know you will." Ethan shook Kaya's hand and she surprised him by pulling him into a brief hug. "Thank you for saving us, both of us. And thank you for loving my sister. Thank you for trusting me with her." As they rode away from the camp, Enola looked back several times, watching until the Wickiups disappeared behind a fold in the land. Then she turned forward, squaring her shoulders, and Ethan saw the determination in her face. She was choosing her path, and she was doing it with her whole heart. The journey back to Georgetown took them 10 days, and it felt different from the trip north. Before, they had been traveling toward uncertainty. Now they were traveling toward home. They talked about their future, about the challenges they would face and how they would handle them. They decided that Enola would mostly stay on the ranch, coming into town only when necessary. It was not an ideal solution, but it would minimize the chance of trouble with people like Deputy Parsons. When they finally crested the ridge that looked down on Ethan's ranch, everything was as they had left it. The house stood solid and welcoming, smoke rising from the chimney where Bill Clayton had kept the fire going. The cattle were spread across the pastures, and the horses whinnied a greeting from the corral. "Home," Enola said softly, and the word was full of wonder and contentment. Bill Clayton met them at the door, a grizzled man in his 60s with a knowing look in his eye. "Heard you took a wife while you were traveling," he said to Ethan without preamble. "News travels fast. Pays to keep my ears open. Wanted you to know that Parsons has been asking questions about you, wondering where you went. I told him you were buying horses up north, which seemed to satisfy him for now, but you will want to be careful." "I appreciate the warning, Bill." The older man looked at Enola, his expression neutral. "Madam, you are welcome on my land anytime you need anything, just so you know." Enola nodded. "Thank you. That means more than you might think." After Bill left, Ethan and Enola stood in the house that was now truly theirs, holding each other close. "Are you sure about this?" Ethan asked. "It is not too late to change your mind." "I have never been more sure of anything. You are my home now, Ethan Turner. Wherever you are, that is where I want to be." He kissed her then, a kiss full of promise and love and hope for the future. When they finally separated, both were smiling. "We should probably make this official," Ethan said. "I do not know if there is a preacher who would marry us, but we can find someone. My uncle married us in the Apache way before we left. In my culture, we are already husband and wife. But if you want to do it in your way too, I am willing. Let me ask around, quietly. Maybe there is someone who will do it without asking too many questions." It turned out that Bill Clayton had a solution for that too. He knew a retired preacher living in the mountains who was happy to perform marriages without reporting them to any official registry, especially when gold changed hands. 2 weeks after returning to the ranch, Ethan and Enola stood in front of the old preacher in his small cabin and exchanged vows. Bill served as witness along with his wife Martha, a practical woman who shook Enola's hand and told her she was getting a good man. "You treat her right," Martha said to Ethan, her voice stern, "or you will answer to me." "Yes, madam." Life settled into a new rhythm. Ethan and Enola worked the ranch together, and he found that having a partner made everything easier and more enjoyable. She was better than him at many things, especially reading the weather and animals, and he learned to trust her instincts. They talked about everything, sharing their thoughts and fears and dreams. At night, they lay together in the big bed Ethan had built, wrapped in each other's arms, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Summer came, turning the meadows golden and making the cattle fat. Ethan made his supply runs into Georgetown, still careful to go alone and to avoid drawing attention. He heard through Bill that Deputy Parsons had lost interest in the Apache women he had been chasing, having moved on to harassing other people. That was a relief, though Ethan knew they could never be entirely safe as long as men like Parsons wore badges. In August, Enola told him she was pregnant. They were sitting on the porch at sunset, and she said it simply, without fanfare. "I am going to have a baby." Ethan felt joy explode in his chest like fireworks. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. My mother told me the signs to watch for. The baby will come in late winter, probably February." He pulled her close, hardly able to speak past the lump in his throat. "We are going to be parents. Are you happy?" "Happier than I have ever been in my life." "Are you?" She smiled, that luminous smile he loved so much. "Yes, I am happy and a little scared. We will figure it out together, just like everything else." As the months passed, and Enola's belly grew round, Ethan found himself preparing for fatherhood with a mix of excitement and terror. He read every book on childbirth he could get his hands on, which was not many, and he consulted with Martha Clayton, who had birthed 6 children of her own. Martha agreed to serve as midwife when the time came, and that gave them both some comfort. Winter arrived, gentler than the previous year but still cold and snowy. Enola remained active and strong throughout her pregnancy, insisting on helping with chores even when Ethan begged her to rest. "Apache women work until the baby comes," she told him. "It is our way. It keeps both mother and child healthy." On a cold night in February, almost exactly a year after the blizzard that had brought them together, Enola went into labor. Ethan rode through the dark to fetch Martha, his heart pounding with fear and anticipation. The birth was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Ethan stayed by Enola's side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, feeling helpless in the face of her pain. Finally, as dawn light was just beginning to show through the windows, a baby's cry filled the house. Martha cleaned the infant efficiently and then placed the tiny bundle in Enola's arms. "You have a son, a strong, healthy boy." Ethan looked down at his son, at the tiny perfect face and the dark downy hair, and felt tears streaming down his face. "He is beautiful." "He looks like you," Enola said, exhausted but smiling. Around the eyes. They named him Thomas after Ethan's father, Tom for short. And from that day forward, Ethan's understanding of love expanded to include this small person who depended on them for everything. Watching Enola nurse their son, seeing her sing to him in Apache and tell him stories in both English and her native tongue, Ethan felt complete in a way he never had before. As Tom grew from infant to toddler, they built a life that was rich despite its challenges. They had to be careful still. aware that the world was not always kind to mixed families, but within the boundaries of their ranch, they were happy. Bill and Martha became like family, visiting regularly and bringing their grandchildren to play with Tom. Ethan found that he did not miss town or society at all. Everything he needed was right here. When Tom was 2, Enola became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter in the autumn, when the aspens were turning gold on the mountainsides. They named her Sarah, after Ethan's mother. Sarah had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, and she completed their family in a way that felt perfect. Over the years, they made trips north to visit Kaya and the rest of Enola's family. The children grew up knowing both sides of their heritage, learning Apache traditions from their mother and aunt, while also understanding their father's world. It was not always easy, navigating between two cultures that were often at odds, but Ethan and Enola were determined to give their children the best of both. Deputy Parsons eventually left Georgetown, heading south to cause trouble elsewhere, and was replaced by a more reasonable man. The sheriff retired and a younger, fairer man took his place. The town slowly became more tolerant, though there were still those who looked askance at Ethan when they learned about his Apache wife. He ignored them, focusing on his family and his land. When Tom was 10 and Sarah was 8, Ethan and Enola took them to visit Kaya, who had married a warrior from her uncle's band and had 3 children of her own. The cousins played together in the mountains while the adults talked and shared news. Kaya pulled Enola aside at one point, and the sisters walked together through the meadow. "Are you happy?" Kaya asked, echoing the question she had posed years before. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Enola answered. "Ethan is a good husband and a wonderful father. We have built a good life together. I am glad. I worried, when you chose to stay with him. I worried you would face too much hardship, too much hatred. We have faced some, but we have faced it together, and that has made all the difference. And now we have Tom and Sarah, who are the best of both of us. They will grow up understanding both worlds, and maybe they will help build bridges between them. That is a beautiful dream. It is, and I intend to live long enough to see it come true." Years continued to pass, marked by the seasons and the growth of their children. Tom grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's build and his mother's skill with horses. Sarah was clever and artistic, drawing pictures of the ranch and the mountains in charcoal and learning to work leather from her mother. Both children were taught to read and write by their father, and stories and survival skills by their mother. Ethan's hair turned gray at the temples, and lines formed around Enola's eyes, but their love for each other never diminished. If anything, it grew deeper, rooted in shared experiences and mutual respect. They knew each other's hearts as well as their own. On their 20th anniversary of the day they met, Ethan and Enola sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of orange and purple. Tom was in town with Bill, learning about buying and selling cattle. Sarah was in the house, working on a leather vest she was making for her mother. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if that blizzard had not hit when it did?" Ethan asked, his arm around Enola's shoulders. "Sometimes. But then I remember that some things are meant to be. The storm brought me to you, and you saved my life in more ways than one. I cannot regret that, no matter how terrifying it was at the time. I love you, Enola Turner, just as much now as the day I first said those words, maybe more. I love you too, Ethan. You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I had lost everything. You gave me hope and love and a reason to believe in a better future. I could never thank you enough for that. You do not need to thank me. Loving you has been the easiest and best thing I have ever done." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began appearing overhead, those campfires of the ancestors watching over them. Inside the house, they could hear Sarah singing softly to herself in Apache, one of the songs Enola had taught her. From somewhere in the distance came the lowing of cattle and the cry of a night bird. As the years rolled on into their later life, Ethan and Enola watched their children grow into remarkable adults. Tom married a young woman from Georgetown, the daughter of a store owner who saw past the color of his mother's skin to the quality of his character. They settled on land adjacent to Ethan's ranch, building their own house and starting their own family. Sarah married a half Apache man she met during one of their visits north, and they split their time between both communities, truly living as bridges between two worlds. Ethan and Enola became grandparents and then great-grandparents. Their legacy was not just the land they had worked or the cattle they had raised, but the family they had built against all odds, proving that love could transcend cultural boundaries and overcome prejudice. They had shown their children and grandchildren that it was possible to honor both heritages, to walk in both worlds with dignity and pride. When Ethan was 72 and Enola 70, they still lived on the ranch, though Tom had taken over most of the daily operations. They spent their days doing light chores, entertaining grandchildren, and sitting on the porch they had sat on countless times before, watching the changing seasons and talking about everything and nothing. One evening in early spring, when the first wildflowers were just beginning to bloom and the meadowlarks were singing their hearts out, Enola said, "I want to tell you something." "What is it?" Ethan asked, noting the serious tone in her voice. "I want to tell you that meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me. That storm, as terrible as it was, brought me to exactly where I was meant to be. I would not change a single thing about our life together." Ethan took her hand, feeling the familiar shape of it in his, worn and weathered by years of hard work but still dear to him. "I feel the same way. Every challenge we faced, every difficulty we overcame, it was all worth it to build this life with you. Our children have good lives. Our grandchildren are growing up in a better world than the one we knew. We did something right, Ethan. We did. We loved each other, and we taught them to love without fear. That is the greatest legacy anyone could leave." They sat there as the sun set, casting the world in gold and rose, and Ethan thought back to that night 50 years ago when a storm had brought a desperate woman to his door. He had made a choice that night to help her, a simple choice that had changed everything. It had not always been easy, and there had been times when he had been afraid, but he had never once regretted it. The blizzard had brought them together, but it was love that had kept them together. Love and respect, and a shared determination to build something good in a world that often seemed determined to tear things down. They had succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, creating not just a family but a community of people who understood that what mattered was not the color of a person's skin or the culture they came from, but the content of their character and the kindness in their heart. As the stars came out and the night birds began their songs, Ethan and Enola went inside their house, the house that had sheltered them through storms both literal and metaphorical. They climbed into the bed they had shared for half a century, wrapped in each other's arms the way they had done thousands of times before. "Good night, my love," Enola whispered. "Good night," Ethan replied, kissing her forehead. "I will see you in the morning." They fell asleep like that, together, the way they had lived their entire life. And in the morning, when the sun rose over the mountains and painted the world in new light, they woke together too, ready to face another day on the land they loved, surrounded by the family they had built, living proof that love truly could conquer all. Their story became a legend in the area, passed down through generations. People spoke of the cowboy who had sheltered an Apache woman during a blizzard and found true love. They told their children and grandchildren about how Ethan and Enola had built a bridge between two worlds, showing that understanding and respect could overcome hatred and fear. Young couples facing opposition to their love would look to Ethan and Enola's example and take courage. Tom eventually took over the ranch completely when Ethan and Enola were in their late 70s, but they still lived on the property, in a smaller house Tom had built for them near the main ranch house. They spent their final years in peace, watching their great-grandchildren play in the same meadows where Tom and Sarah had played decades before. They tended a small garden, told stories to anyone who would listen, and took walks together every evening, moving slowly but always hand in hand. On a warm summer evening, when Ethan was 78 and Enola was 76, they sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. The sunset was particularly beautiful that night, the sky streaked with purple and gold. Enola leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, and they watched the day fade into night together. "I have had a good life," Enola said softly. "Better than I ever imagined possible that night when I stumbled through the snow toward your door. So have I." "You made everything better, Enola. Every single thing. Promise me something, anything. Promise me that you will remember always that love is what matters. Not fear, not hatred, not all the things that divide people. Just love. I promise." "Though I do not think I could forget even if I tried." She smiled and closed her eyes, content. They sat there in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the sounds of their family inside the house, the cattle settling down for the night, the wind moving through the pines. It was a perfect moment, a culmination of a lifetime of perfect moments built one on top of another. Ethan felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. He had lived a good life, a full life, rich with love and purpose. He had faced challenges and overcome them. He had loved deeply and been loved in return. He had raised children who were good people, who were making the world better. He had built something that would last beyond his own years, a legacy of love and understanding. As the stars began appearing in the darkening sky, those campfires of the ancestors that Enola's grandmother had told her about so many years ago, Ethan thought about how grateful he was for that blizzard, for the twist of fate that had brought Enola to his door. It had been the beginning of everything that mattered in his life. Years continued to pass, and both Ethan and Enola lived to see their 80th birthdays, a remarkable feat in that time and place. They remained sharp of mind even as their bodies grew frailer, and they never lost the love that had sustained them through so many years. When Enola passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, Ethan grieved deeply, but also felt gratitude that they had been given so many years together. He followed her 2 years later, dying quietly in the same bed where they had slept together for over 50 years. Tom and Sarah were with him at the end, along with several of his grandchildren. His last words were, "Tell your mother I am coming," and then he closed his eyes and let go, ready to join the woman who had been his partner, his love, his everything. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of a cottonwood tree that Ethan had planted the year Tom was born. Their graves were simple but well tended, visited regularly by their descendants who never forgot the story of how the blizzard had brought them together and how their love had changed everything. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Each new generation heard the story of their great-great-grandparents, of the cowboy who had sheltered an Apache woman during a storm and discovered that love knew no boundaries. The story became part of the family's identity, a reminder of where they came from and what their ancestors had overcome to build the life they now enjoyed. In Georgetown, a small museum eventually included a display about Ethan and Enola Turner, recognizing them as pioneers not just of the land but of understanding between cultures. Their story inspired others to look beyond prejudice and see the humanity in all people. Schools taught about them as an example of courage and love triumphing over hatred and fear. But more than any public recognition, their true legacy lived on in their descendants, in the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried both Apache and European blood in their veins and walked proudly in both worlds. They were proof that two people from different backgrounds could build something beautiful together, that love was indeed stronger than hate, and that the choices we make to help others, to show kindness to strangers, can change the course of history. The ranch still stands today, a testament to what Ethan and Enola built together. The house has been expanded and modernized, but the original cabin that sheltered Enola from the storm remains, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. Visitors sometimes come to see it, to hear the story of the blizzard and the love that followed. And on clear nights when the stars are bright overhead, those campfires of the ancestors burning in the sky, you can almost feel their presence there. Ethan and Enola, still watching over the land they loved and the family they created. Their love story ended not with death but with continuation, living on in every generation that follows, a reminder that the greatest storms in life can sometimes bring us exactly what we need, and that opening our door to help a stranger might just be opening our door to love itself. The blizzard brought a lost Apache woman to a cowboy. He sheltered her and learned true love, and together they built a legacy that would never be forgotten. A legacy of love that conquered all obstacles and proved that the human heart, when opened fully, knows no boundaries of culture or race. Their story became eternal, passed down through the ages, inspiring countless others to choose love over fear, kindness over cruelty, and hope over despair. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift they could have given to the world.